The line was crackling with a faint static that made the attorney's voice sound even colder than it was. Cameron Ellis sat in his office chair, his hand gripped so tightly around his smartphone that his knuckles were white. The voice on the other end was not offering a greeting. It was delivering a timeline. The attorney was explaining that the state licensing board had officially moved from an inquiry to a formal investigation. Cameron had exactly 14 days to submit a full digital audit and a written response to the allegations of a confidentiality breach. If the clock ran out before the documents were filed, the suspension of his license would be automatic. Cameron did not say a word. He listened as the attorney asked if he understood the gravity of the 14-day window. The attorney's tone was clinical, the sound of a professional who had seen this collapse a dozen times before. Cameron looked at the certificates on his wall, the degrees and the licenses he had spent 12 years earning. He realized they were now being measured in hours. The call ended with a sharp digital beep, leaving Cameron in a silence that felt heavier than any he had ever experienced in a session. In that moment, the identity he had built as a healer was being stripped away, replaced by the label of a liability. Dr. Cameron Ellis was a licensed therapist running a solo private practice that was, by every external measure, a success. But the reality of a full week for Cameron was a grueling marathon of emotional labor followed by an exhausting sprint of paperwork. A typical Monday began at 8 o'clock in the morning and did not truly end until nearly midnight. He would see 7 clients back to back, moving from the trauma of a broken marriage to the high-stakes anxiety of a corporate executive. When the final client left the office at 7 o'clock, Cameron's real work began. He would sit in the dim light of his office, staring at a stack of manila folders that represented 14 hours of unbilled clinical notes. He was sacrificing his own mental health to maintain the records of everyone else's. He was always behind. Specific treatment plans were being drafted 3 days after the session, when the nuances of the conversation had already begun to fade into a blur of professional fatigue. The cost of this administrative burden was not just personal, it was clinical. There was a specific client named Marcus who had been seeing Cameron for 6 months to address severe clinical depression. On a Thursday afternoon, Marcus sat on the gray fabric sofa and shared a breakthrough regarding his childhood. It was the kind of moment a therapist waits for. But Cameron was so mentally preoccupied with the 3 hours of overdue notes from his morning sessions that he missed the subtle shift in Marcus's tone. He did not ask the follow-up question that would have unlocked the session. He just nodded and checked the clock. He was physically present in the room, but he was emotionally trapped in his own filing cabinet. He was reaching the breaking point where the clinical notes were becoming more important than the human being sitting across from him. Cameron decided to use artificial intelligence because the weight of the silence in his office was becoming unbearable. He opened his laptop between sessions and began feeding the raw, unedited transcripts of his notes into a standard browser tab. He did not use a protected server. He did not use an encrypted interface. He typed a prompt that asked the software to summarize the clinical themes of his session with a patient he identified by full name and date of birth. The software produced a beautiful professional summary in less than 10 seconds. It felt like a miracle. It felt like he had finally found a way to breathe again. The disaster happened on a Wednesday morning. Cameron had used the software to draft a summary for a client named Julia. In his haste to move to his next appointment, he did not realize that the public model he was using had indexed the information. A week later, Julia was searching for her own name online. She found a cached version of a clinical summary that detailed her most private struggles with an eating disorder. The breach was not a glitch in the software. It was a failure of the system. Julia called the office, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and profound hurt. Cameron tried to speak, his throat tightening as he realized the magnitude of the error. He started to say, "Julia, please, let me explain how the data works." But she cut him off before he could finish the sentence. She told him that she had come to him because she could not trust her own family with this information, and he had given it to a search engine. Cameron tried one last time to tell her that he would fix it, that he would call the platform and have it removed, but the only response was the sharp, hollow click of the line going dead. He stood with the receiver pressed to his ear for a full minute, listening to the dial tone, realizing that no amount of technical cleanup could ever restore the safety of that room. After that call, Cameron did not move for a long time. He sat on the floor of his office, his back against the door, his hands pressed hard against his eyes. The room that had been a sanctuary for hundreds of people now felt like a crime scene. He looked at the laptop sitting on his desk and felt a physical revulsion toward the technology he had invited into his practice. He stayed in that position for nearly an hour, watching the afternoon sun crawl across the carpet, realizing that he had traded his professional soul for a few extra hours of sleep. He had tried to solve a human problem with a shortcut, and in doing so, he had invited the entire world into the most private room in his life. The recovery did not happen in the courtroom. It happened in a weekend of total systemic reconstruction. He contacted a healthcare attorney and a HIPAA compliance consultant named Sarah, who arrived at his office on Saturday morning. Sarah sat across from him and was blunt. She told him that the public model he used was effectively a broadcast tower for sensitive data. She spent 6 hours auditing his digital footprint, showing him exactly where the leaks were. They spent the rest of the day mapping out a secure, encrypted workflow using Heidi Health, a dedicated clinical tool that utilized end-to-end encryption, and had signed a business associate agreement to legally guarantee data protection. On Sunday, Cameron drafted a new informed consent document. He moved away from the dense legal jargon of his previous forms. In plain language, he wrote that while AI would be used to help transcribe and organize clinical themes, no identifiable data would ever leave a secure, encrypted environment, and no human at the software company would ever see his clients' words. He promised them that the technology existed only to keep his eyes on them instead of on a keyboard. It took nearly 48 hours of technical migration and ethical soul-searching before the system felt like a fortress rather than a liability. As the weeks passed, the fear of the licensing board began to recede, replaced by a new and dangerous sense of clinical momentum. Once the system was secure, Cameron saw an opportunity he had never had before. Because his admin time had virtually vanished, he began to scale. Over the next 3 months, he moved from seeing 20 clients a week to 35. His revenue spiked. He was finally making the kind of money he had dreamed of when he finished graduate school. He felt like a productivity machine, moving through his days with mathematical precision. But the efficiency was hiding a new and more subtle danger. The burnout paradox hit him on a Tuesday in late November. He had been in the office since 7 o'clock in the morning, and by the time his 5th session began, the walls of the room felt like they were leaning inward. He had absorbed the grief of a widow and the rage of a terminated employee before lunch. Physically, his back was a knot of tension. Mentally, his focus was fraying at the edges. When David, a longtime client, began to speak about his struggle with isolation, Cameron found himself nodding reflexively. While David spoke, Cameron's mind was already 3 steps ahead, mentally composing the specific prompt he would use to summarize David's breakthrough once the door closed. He was not listening for the emotion. He was listening for the keywords that would satisfy the machine. Suddenly, the room went quiet. David had stopped mid-sentence. Cameron looked up from his notepad and saw David leaning forward, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. David asked if Cameron was okay. He said that for the last 10 minutes, it felt like Cameron was looking right through him, like he was watching a clock that David could not see. Cameron felt a cold, sharp spike of shame in his chest. He realized that a man who was paying for his undivided attention was now the one providing the emotional support. The roles had flipped because Cameron had allowed his presence to become a bottleneck he was trying to bypass. After David left, Cameron did not call the next client into the room. He turned off the lights and sat in the dark for 30 minutes. He realized that by automating the paperwork, he had inadvertently automated his soul. He had created a system that was efficient for a machine but unsustainable for a human heart. The extra 15 clients a week had paid for a better car and a higher savings account. But they had cost him the very clinical intuition that made him a therapist in the first place. He saw clearly that efficiency is a trap. If it packs your schedule until there is no room left for the person sitting across from you. That evening, Cameron made a decision that felt counterintuitive to his business goals. He reduced his caseload to exactly 28 clients. Not 20, not 35. 28 was the number that allowed for financial stability while leaving room for 20-minute recovery periods between every single session. He rebuilt his schedule to prioritize the quality of the room over the volume of the ledger. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, Cameron was not staring at a stack of folders. He was taking a walk through a local park, his phone off, his mind quiet. His notes for the day were already encrypted and finalized. He realized that the paradox of his profession was that to be a better therapist, he had to stop trying to be a better machine. He looked back at the man who had almost lost his license and saw someone who had been blinded by the very burnout he was trained to treat. He realized that the technology was only as ethical as the person holding the keyboard. Cameron Ellis found that his work only regained its value when he stopped letting a digital prompt dictate the rhythm of a human conversation. He realized that while the machine could perfectly summarize the words David spoke, it was entirely blind to the moment David noticed he was gone. Any professional whose relationships are their business model faces the risk of letting speed replace substance. The system will always optimize for volume. Only the human can optimize for presence. Build the framework first. Secure the room, then scale, but only as far as your humanity can follow. At the AI Advantage, we examine the frameworks that allow professionals to integrate technology without sacrificing their integrity. These are the case studies that show you where the line is before you cross it. New episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. Subscribe and follow along.